Good morning, everyone. If you're joining us from cold Washington or if you're joining us from warm Santiago, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. We are living in a world of many surprises, but that wasn't the case in Chile on Sunday, where Jose Antonio Cast had a resounding win in the presidential runoff. Today, we'll discuss what that outcome means for Chile's future and what comes next. Over the next 45 minutes, we'll unpack the runoff results and also explore what they signal for the country's direction over the next 4 years. I'm Jason Marzak, Vice President and Senior Director of the Adrian Arch Latin America Center here at the Atlantic Council. I'll introduce our speakers in a moment, but also do want to also acknowledge that Ms. Arch, the founder of the center, is joining us for this conversation as well today. The results were quite clear on Sunday. Cast secured 58.16% of the vote to 41.84% for Jeanette Jara, which translates into an over 2 million vote win for him of the nearly 12.5 million votes cast. As well, President-elect Cast won in all 16 regions in Chile with more than 60% of the vote, and 9 of them. This includes areas traditionally won by the left. In March, he will become only the second president on the right after the return to the democracy in Chile. What transpired in Chile this week was also, yet again, a lesson in how elections and electoral victories are done. Voting occurred without incident. The results came in fast. Cast and Jara spoke afterwards, and Cast then visited outgoing President Gabriel Boric at La Moneda the next day. As well, President-elect Cast called for national unity and also reinforced the focus on top priorities, including public security, health, education, and housing. We've also seen regional reaction, and congratulations came in from leaders across the political spectrum, with the notable exception, of course, of Colombia's Petro, whose incendiary comments sparked a quick response by Chile's current foreign minister. Today, we'll focus on 3 main questions. First, what do the results tell us about voter priorities and where Chile is headed? Second, what should we expect from the incoming administration on the economy, on security, and the investment climate? And third, how will this transition shape the US-Chile relationship at a critical moment? Here, note that Secretary Rubio and President-elect Cast both spoke yesterday, where they discussed deepening cooperation. And of course, we also have an ambassador in Chile, Brandon Judd. Before we begin, let me introduce our 3 panelists who are joining for this latest installment of our Chile Election Series 2025 programming. First, Cristina Bitard, Senior Partner and President of Acerta Chile, who brings invaluable perspectives on how the private sector views this transition and what it means for investment. Next, Professor Patricio Navi of New York University, who's one of the leading experts on Chilean politics and electoral behavior, and has also been tracking this campaign closely. And finally, Christian Stewart, Executive Director of Ideas País, but also a 2025-2026 Millennium Leadership Fellow here at the Atlantic Council, who will offer insights on policy innovation and citizen engagement. I'll also share that all 3 of our speakers are joining us from Santiago. I'm the only one in cold Washington, D.C. today. As well, for viewers, feel free to submit your questions. You can do so using askac.org. That's askac.org. With that, let's dive into the conversation. Patricia, let's start with you. If you could start with sharing with our viewers, what does this victory tell us about Chile's political landscape, particularly since it was only 2 years ago that voters rejected a constitutional reform that would have brought the country further in the direction of the right, but yet on Sunday we saw a resounding victory for President-elect Cast.
Yes, thank you for the invitation, and it's a pleasure to be with everybody here in this panel. Chile has had alternation in power since 2009. So the last time that the ruling coalition won a presidential election was in 2005, when Michelle Bachelet became the first woman president of Chile. And even in that election, I think Bachelet won largely because she represented change. She was the first woman to be elected president. So Chileans have been voting for change for a while now. And this time around, they voted for change again. Presidential approval for Boric was rather low, so it shouldn't be a surprise that an opposition candidate won. Yet it wasn't just any opposition candidate, right? It was a far right candidate, or at least somebody who's defined in Chile as a far right candidate in Chile and abroad. Never mind that he ran against a far left candidate who normally doesn't get defined as a far left candidate, a member of the Communist Party. But that's sort of beyond what we're discussing at this point. But I think the reason why Boric, or the left-wing candidate, lost is because Chileans have been voting for change in every election for a long time. And the reason why Cast won has a lot to do with crime and insecurity. And just like in other countries, including the US, now migration is no longer a labor issue problem. Migration is also an insecurity problem. And in that sense, I think Cast understood very well that Chileans were concerned about security, and he brought migration in, which is something that also Chileans are very concerned about, and he campaigned on those issues. So, in that sense, he campaigned on the issues that people cared about, and people were ready to vote for an opposition candidate. So it's not that Chileans are now all of a sudden becoming far right wingers. Chileans are pretty much in the same place where they have been for the last 20 years. They are moderate. They tend to be in favor of gradual change. And they expect this government to introduce some change, particularly in security policies and on migration policies.
Thanks so much, Patricio. Let me a follow-up question for you. Change can only come about if the incoming team has the ability to make that change, and that requires also Congress, right? The president-elect's party significantly expanded its presence in both chambers in last month's elections, but without a majority in either one. And so based on the coalition, the composition of Congress, what do you see as the ability to affect that change working with Congress specifically on crime, security, and migration, some of the top issues on which President-elect Cast won the vote?
Right. So he's not going to have a majority in Congress, but he can build a majority. I think we often forget that the job of a politician is to actually build consensus, build agreement, broker agreement with people who think differently, with other politicians. So a good politician is not a politician that always has a majority. A good politician is a politician that can build a majority, um, creating support or bringing legislative support to his or her initiatives based on things that people want. I mean, politicians want to do or respond to the demands of the people. Chileans do care. They are concerned about insecurity and about migration. So he will have the votes to implement gradual reforms. I think it is important to underline the word gradual. President Cast is not going to have enough support in the legislature or among the population for radical reforms. People voted for him this time around because the alternative was much worse. In the first round, he only got about 23% of the vote. So 3 out of 4 Chileans didn't want him as their first choice for president. So there isn't a majority in Chile for radical right-wing reform. There is a majority for a shift to the right, but a gradual, moderate shift to the right. And that's what, to everyone's or to many people's surprise, but not to those who know him, President-elect Cast said on Sunday night. I mean, he extended an olive branch to the rest of the political right and even to centrists to say, okay, so people voted for change. We need to deliver change, and let's sit down and agree on what right-wing change we can deliver.
And those are also reflected with the comments he then made again on Monday after his meeting with President Boric, where he then again called for national unity and working across the political spectrum. Christian, let me shift to you. With a business perspective, markets, investors, companies have been watching this election very closely. Uh, there are just tremendous opportunities for investment in Chile. This is a priority of the work here as well at the Adrian Arch Latin America Center. What are your initial impressions of the president-elect's of the economic team and the approach to business relations and how that could actually and the opportunities that that could present for Chile?
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation, Jason, and the Atlantic Council, and all of you for having me here. I would say this has been taken by the private sector as a great news. It has been internalized by the markets before Sunday. Markets have been booming in Chile. IPSA, which is the stock market indicator, has been rising so significantly. The peso, Chilean peso, has been strengthening substantially in the last few months. So that's a signal that the market is taking it positively and internalizing. Before he won, because it was all the polls had already said that he was going to win. We didn't know he was going to win by 2 million votes or what amount, but as Patricio said, we all knew that the change was probably going to win this time because the other candidate was not good enough either to compete. So I think it was an astounding victory. He won in every region of the country, in more than 90% of the municipalities, with 2 million votes more than the other candidate. So he has a very strong stance to begin his mandate. President-elect Cast has said that he wants an emergency government, and that emergency government is focused basically in public security, public safety, organized crime, illegal immigration, and, to your question, growth and employment. And I think the economic team led today by Jorge Quiros, which will definitely be in the cabinet. We don't know if he will be Minister of Finance or Minister of Economics and other ministries, because they're going to try to mix probably economics, energy, and mining together. That's what President Cast has been saying. So he definitely will have an important role. And what they have been talking about is, first of all, give all the signals of predictability, credibility, and urgency that the government needs to give to bring investment back to Chile. And that's the way to start growth and increase employment. They have been emphasizing fiscal discipline, tax competitiveness, deregulation, investment reactivation. It's what exact economic team he will end up putting. We don't know. Definitely Jorge Quiros will be in somewhere, but there's a big group of possible other ministers like Rosana Costa or Rafael Vergara. I'm sorry. Michelle Lavé, or others that are in the pipeline to assume in different economic ministries. So I am very positive. The private sector has taken this amazingly happy, and they have flown. Most of the representatives of the different guilds have flown today with President Cast to Argentina in a first trip outside of Chile, and that's a big signal that he's going to support economic investment and economic growth. Yes, he went with the Luxich Group, Mate Group, the Jumbos, the Pullman Group. So that's a big signal, his first trip and his first action. And it talks a lot of what he's expected to do.
And Christina, a follow-up question for you. When you look at the different sectors and the lowest hanging fruit, the biggest opportunities to be able to bring in additional investment, especially maybe U.S. investment or the president elect is on a trip to Argentina, so maybe other investment from the region. Where do you see the greatest opportunities in the short run, and what needs to be done in the first, say, 100 days to be able to accelerate that investment?
Well, I think it's part of their economic plan. But first of all, reducing the corporate income tax. They have promised to reduce it from 27 to 23 for medium and large firms. Also, additional tax credit to lower the effective rate toward 20% for companies that are hiring workers at risk of informality. So if you hire, you can reduce even more your corporate tax. There's also a promise of corporate taxing for small and medium enterprises at 12.5. That would be huge, a huge change for small and medium companies. A gradual elimination of property taxes, I think that's going to be harder. It's going to have more opposition probably, but they have started to say it's going to be gradual for homeowners over 65 years old to start with. And I think it's very important for international investment, the elimination of the capital gains tax on the sale of low liquidity shares and restoration of full tax integration. So I think there's a lot of things, but I would say tax is one. And the second is permitting. As a Chilean permitting system has been stuck. Permittings are taking too long. Big projects are taking 5 years to get a firm RCA or a permit to construct. And that, if they are able to accelerate with political will, because you don't need a lot of changes in the law for that, I think they can make a huge difference in mining, energy, and big capital projects.
Thanks so much, Christina. And I'll give a plug here that we'll be coming out with a issue brief shortly, looking at the first 100 days and how to accelerate U.S. investment into Chile. That was informed by a roundtable that we had here in Washington in partnership with AmCham and with support from MetLife and over the course of the fall. So there's a huge opportunities on investment. I want to move on to you, Christian. You've been closely tracking citizen engagement, particularly how younger Chileans have participated in this process. What do these results reveal about the degree to which the president-elect has successfully connected with young Chilean voters, and also what will need to be done to maintain or even build on that support?
Well, first of all, hello everyone. It's a pleasure to meet you all on this call. Jason, thank you very much for the invitation. It's always great to continue strengthening the relationship between Idea País and the Atlantic Council. So thanks a lot for this opportunity. It is actually a very good question. Young people in Chile, and I assume this happens worldwide, face a significant lack of future prospects. Young people cannot afford housing. Education is perceived to be in serious decline here in Chile. The cost of raising children is super high, and also climate change remains in constant, as a constant source of uncertainty. And as a result, the sense of that the future is kind of blocked and that opportunities are increasingly out of reach is far from being marginal. And well, against this backdrop, President-elect José Antonio Cast focused on offering solutions to basic concerns. He framed actually his government program as a government, an emergency government, and it was on these fundamental issues that he received a strong support. If we take a look at the results of the second round of the presidential election, young people seem to be connected, but it's actually a conditional support. Electoral data indicate in general that he secured a majority among men under 35, while the support among young women was more fragmented. And at the same time, post-election analysis revealed that younger cohorts registered the highest level of null and blank voting, nearly 9% among young men and over 8% among young women, which is quite above the national average. And these outcomes point to a nuanced dynamic. On the one hand, the president-elect was able to attract young voters concerned about, as Patricio and Cristina were mentioning, about public security, employment prospects, and economic uncertainty. But on the other hand, the elevated protest vote among young people signals persistent skepticism towards political alternatives and weak partisan identification. And in this sense, I would say that electoral support of young voters should also be understood less as ideological alignment and more as a pragmatic issue-driven support. So I think, yeah, I mean, this is quite more diverse in the interpretation than to say young people are followers of caste.
What do you think, Christian? What does the president-elect need to do to build on that support among young voters?
Yeah, in order to sustain and expand this support will crucially depend on the administration's ability to translate the campaign's priorities into early, visible, and also effective results. Policies addressing neighborhood security, access to formal employment, and the quality of public services, and thinking about transportation, public education, which is in super bad shape nowadays, and healthcare, are very likely to be decisive. For younger voters in particular, political credibility is closely tied to outcomes rather to discourse. And therefore, in these young cohorts, failure to demonstrate progress within a relatively short time frame can imply a rapid erosion of support, with people shifting from being supporters of the government to becoming opponents in a matter of days. So this is a very serious issue to the government in the first 90 days.
And thank you, Christian. And Pato, the short time frame that Christian speaks about, in Chile, we have less than 3 months now as part of the transition. So there's frankly a good amount of time to get things in order and get the teams ready for day one on March 11th. What should we be looking for, Pato, during this transition period? What are different signals? Christina spoke about the economic team. We talked about the president-elect's trip to Argentina today. What other, likely a trip to Washington at some point between now and March 11th? What other signals are you looking at politically that the president-elect might be seeking to send between now and his inauguration?
Yes, well, I think there are three key issues, and in addition to the economic sort of theme that Cristina talked about. The first one is that the president has to signal what he plans to do to curb insecurity and illegal immigration. He's made some very, very sort of extreme promises in terms of expelling everyone who's undocumented. But just as we saw in the United States, I mean, there are some areas of the economy where undocumented workers are very, very important. So expelling everyone who's undocumented might not be in the best interest of the economy at this point. Think of agriculture in the case of Chile, and particularly the harvesting system for fruits and wine. But he has to do something because he campaigned on that. So he needs to clearly lay out what his program, what his proposals are. Then he also has to clarify what he's going to do with regards to the other right-wing political parties. So the composition of the cabinet and the appointment of key posts is a very, very important step in clarifying the extent to which the other political parties will be part of the government. I suspect they will be. So I suspect the president will have close to a majority in Congress with the support of the moderate right-wing parties. But I think we'll see the extent to which those parties kind of join this emerging coalition that President Kast is putting together. And the third issue, which you mentioned, has to do with international relations, right? So President Kast wants to return to those days when the United States and Chile were very close, not just in terms of trade relations, but also in terms of political relations, even when there were disagreements. I mean, Chile signed a free trade agreement with the US at a time when Chile wasn't supporting the US in the war on the war in Iraq. But Chile and the U.S. have very, very strong relations. I think that already changed, right? We saw yesterday Secretary Rubio congratulating Cast and President Trump, also mentioning Jose Antonio Cast's victory. So I think relations with the U.S. will significantly improve. But from the viewpoint of Chile, I think those relations need to improve without putting at risk the strong trade relations we have with China. So China is our most important trade partner. I think all Chileans from left to right would be very happy if the US were to become our most important trade partner. But while we wait for the US to make that decision and to start trading with Chile a bit more, we need to keep good relations with China, our most important trade partner. So I think President Cast has those challenges ahead. I think it is significant that now the US has a friend not just in Chile, but the US now has a friend in the president of Chile, something that the US didn't have before. So Chile has been a friend with the US, but the government wasn't really friendly to the US government. That will change. But for Chile, we are a very open economy. Chile doesn't really believe in protectionism. So in that regard, I think we're going to have to work together in order to sort of find a common theme and a common agenda.
Pacho, just picking up on that point, I mean, Chile has is one of the countries with the most free trade agreements in the world, actually, and has very diversified trade relationships. My trips to Chile, I always hear from locals that people want more U.S. investment, but it just doesn't arrive, right? And so the question's going to be, and perhaps now with the new national security strategy, where President Trump has prioritized enlisting and expanding our partners in the Western Hemisphere, but also accelerating U.S. investment in key strategic areas of economies around the hemisphere. And frankly, here in Washington, Chile has traditionally gotten less attention than it deserves. I'm hopeful now that it will get more attention. But maybe, Christina, as we look at these key sectors and the opportunities for investment, you talked about this a little bit beforehand as well. But what do you see as kind of those key, like what needs to be done to accomplish that goal of really shifting much more U.S. investment to Chile? As Patricio said, the U.S. now has a strong friend in the president elect and his team. And so, how do you see that from an economic or from a business perspective, perhaps translating into wins for the Chilean for the Chilean economy, and also wins for the U.S. as well, and having additional access to critical supply chains?
Yeah, I think there's a huge opportunity because, as Patricio said, this president wants a better relationship with the United States. But to make investment come, you need to become competitive. And I think Chile has a very high tax rate. It has a very high tax. It's a labor tax. We have huge laws that rigidize our labor economy, and employment is expensive. Every time it's more expensive. So definitely, if there are some tax reforms, as we said, labor reforms, permitting, fast tracks within the law, but fast tracks that can allow us to be more competitive so that investments come and are quickly being able to be made, because there's a lot of investments here that are standing there and not being able to be executed because of the permits and all the red tape. So if that happens and we become more competitive, I think Chile will be an attractive place for more U.S. investment to come, especially with President Trump's new national security policy that indicates that he will be choosing. And I think there's an opportunity there. Definitely, the relation with China will be tricky for Chilean president, but I think we can sort it out if we become more competitive for everybody that wants to invest. And I think that's a huge opportunity. The other thing is fiscal, not only austerity, which is something this government has promised, but also state reform, making the state a more modernized and effective state will also make us more competitive for foreign investment. I think that's very highly feasible, that many of these things that we're talking, probably not all, but many of these could be taken forward by this government, and they only have a very short honeymoon to do it. O sea, I don't believe this is something that will last unless population continues to support the government, because they're doing a lot in public safety and economy. It's going to be a short honeymoon, and things have to be fast-tracked at the beginning, the first 90, 100 days.
Christina, just to pick up on that, what do you see of the different priorities you outline? Where do you see the best opportunities to fast track? What do you see as being able to move forward most quickly?
I see highly feasible all the administrative regulatory actions to accelerate permits and investment approvals. I think that can move really fast with political will and clarity of which are the projects you want to move forward. Corporate tax reductions and changes in the labor market, it's probably going to take more because you need to negotiate in Congress, and there's no majority. I think they will build a majority, but it will be majorities that are functional for the projects. It's not going to be a majority for the whole government forever. It's going to be depending on the projects and how much public support each law has, or each legislative change. I think the property tax reduction is very politically sensitive. And labor reforms are more complex, because then the left will probably oppose severely. But I think permitting is going to be fast, and there's a lot of measures that you can take to reduce red tape in every sector.
Yeah, and I know from conversations that we've had here at the Atlantic Council that remains a concern, right? The amount of bureaucracy and how that stifles investment into Chile. So that'll be very welcome. I want to go to a question for you, Christian, and then I'll take some questions that are coming in over askac.org. Again, that's askac.org. But Christian, I'd like to get your perspective on what do you see as the role of civil society organizations like Idea País, how to kind of the role of civil society in helping to balance the expectations and also what's politically achievable. I think one of the things that we've said as part of this conversation as well, lots of expectations for what President-elect Cast will achieve. But at the same time, that this was a changed election, and it's going to be important for the president-elect and his team to be able to maintain that support. And so what do you see as the role of civil society? And I think you said earlier that if things don't move forward, that you could start to see some negative reaction a few months down the road. So how do you see that playing out?
Or maybe a few days.
Or maybe a few days.
Yeah. So I mean, the magnitude of the president-elect's victory, 52% with victories in all regions and more than 300 municipalities out of 345, provides, I would say, significant political momentum and also support for him. But it also, as everyone has said, generates high public expectations. And in this context, the policy initiatives with the greatest potential to improve citizens' lives within the first 2 years are those that combine urgency, feasibility, and visible impact. Quick note, I say 2 years because for the first time in, I think, 6 years, we will have a time frame of 2 years without elections, which will help decreasing polarization and also short-term focus that has kept this country totally paralyzed. And for that reason, this 2 years gap creates a huge window of opportunity in order to approve sensitive reforms that would normally face resistance during electoral times. So I think despite the strength of this presidential mandate, Chile's institutional context remains one of fragmentation. So there's no single political force or party holding a clear majority in the National Congress, and this creates high tension between electoral expectations on the one hand for bold reforms and the realities of governance. And in this regard, I think social like NGOs and basically society, civil society has a crucial role in order to put things in order and to lead the conversation, like so that people can interact. And the National Congress, this polarization and fragmentation is not the general rule. So I think hopefully we have a big space to help in this regard.
Thank you. Thanks, Christian. Now we're getting a lot of questions over askac.org, specifically regarding regional international policy of the CAST team. And Patricia, I'm going to go to you maybe on this first question. I usually prefer the questions that are not from anonymous, but this is a good question, and it is anonymous. Which is, we've talked about this a little bit before, the role of China in Chile from a commercial perspective. But the question here is, how might Chile's relations with both China and also Russia look like under a CAST administration?
Well, I just want to remind the point that I think President-elect Kast and most of the members of the elites in Chile would much rather have a far stronger relationship with the US than we currently have. So we are open to Chile is very open, and I think President Kast is very open to strengthening relations with the United States. China is still our most important trade partner, but the US can be our best friend. And you can certainly find room to strengthen relations with the US without affecting trade relations with China. Relations between Chile and Russia are not that important. I know Russia was more involved in interactions with Brazil and with some other Latin American countries. President Boric wasn't that he was very interested in foreign affairs, but he probably didn't understand the complexities of foreign affairs in the way that a president should. His finance minister was probably much better, but then he wasn't the boss. The president was the boss. But I'm not really concerned about where the relations between Chile or relations between Chile and the US will go, because I think it's pretty clear for President Trump and for everyone in the community in Chile that sticking with the United States as we have done for most of the past 50 years is a good strategy for Chile, and it's a good strategy for the US. So if the US is ready to engage more with Chile, I think Chile will happily take it, because Chile has been ready to engage more with the US for many years. There was the Boric administration kind of parenthesis, but I think if the US sends any signal that the US wants stronger relations with Chile, Chile will sort of accept that right away.
Thanks, Patricio. Christina or Christian, do you want to comment on maybe on the China portion of that question? No.
Well, I think it's pretty clear. Chile has to continue having a relationship with China, but definitely this government will prioritize a US relationship and will strengthen that relationship very much. The question is whether investment will follow or it's only going to be political. And I hope investment follows, because that's what strengthens most of our relationships, especially here. There's a lot of sectors that are important, like critical minerals, where we're very strong. We have a very strong lithium potential, copper potential. We have hydrogen to be produced. in large quantities if it becomes competitive for the world economy. But we are a good partner for the US, and I think that the question today is whether this government makes Chile more competitive for US investment to come as quickly as we need.
Mhm. And Christina, fully concur. I hope the investment follows, as the U.S. investment follows as well. So, we have our new ambassador in Chile, Brandon Judd. I know is very focused on accelerating U.S. investment. The President Trump's national security strategy outlines specific ways to accelerate U.S. investment and calls on different U.S. Agencies to help to facilitate that investment. My conversations are that there is a desire across U.S. government to see how to facilitate investment across the region, and of course, Chile is such a strategic partner for critical supply chains. But at the same time, in the interim, China has become a very important commercial partner, the most important commercial partner for Chile, and that can't be walked back in a matter of days or in a matter of months. So there's going to have to be that balancing act in the interim. I'm going to take another question here of looking more broadly across the region. We've talked about President-elect Kast's trip to Argentina. But another question, how do you think Kast will position Chile's role in Latin America overall during his presidency? Maybe Patricia, I'll start with you on that one too.
I think Chile for the past 30 years, 35 years, has always had open for business sign at its door. That really wasn't sort of so prominent in the past 4 years, but I think it'll get new light and it'll be put in a far more prominent place. So I think opportunities, particularly with countries like Bolivia now, open up significantly because there is a market-friendly government in Bolivia. We'll see what happens in Colombia and Peru, but there are good suspicions that there will be more opportunities for trade there as well. The politics of everything is a bit more complicated in Latin America. I think the population in Chile, while wanting to see developments in favor of democracy in Venezuela, is not very fond of U.S. military strikes on Venezuela. I mean, there was a military coup in Chile in '73 where the presidential palace was bombed. So I think it would be difficult for President Kast to sort of justify the bombing of Venezuela in order to remove the Maduro dictatorship. But other than that, I think Chile can be a strong ally for the U.S. to promote trade opportunities. One of the successful things that Chile has done is sort of advance the idea that you don't need to like the government to like the country, right? So even if you have these agreements with the government, you can still do business with that country. And I think that's a message that can resonate even with left-wing governments in Latin America. I mean, if the US wants to engage more with Latin American countries, I think Latin American countries should do it, even if they have governments that are not necessarily friendly with the Trump administration. Business is business, and I think Chile can sort of provide an example there for other countries to follow. If there are business opportunities, then let's develop those opportunities. Let's take advantage of those opportunities, and that will strengthen relations and it will actually bring us closer as countries.
Thank you. I'm going to take, we're almost out of time, but I think just one last question maybe for you, Christina, that's from Pedro Brenes in Santiago. How do you foresee Kast's approach to resolving the reciprocal tariffs with the United States? Just and a note on the side here that President Trump has announced framework agreements with Argentina, with Ecuador, El Salvador, Guatemala. What do you see insofar as the likelihood of that happening with Chile?
I see it's going to be very likely and very fast. There's good grounds to start. That negotiation started, and it's going to be institutional. I think it was political that this agreement didn't occur during President Boric's administration. There has not been a good relationship between President Boric and President Trump. So I guess it's going to be a quick signal that President Trump can give to Chile and President Cast. And I'm sure that will happen very quickly.
Wonderful. And Christian, just the last question for you. Christian, what do you see? What are you looking at insofar as the first 100 days? Anything that you haven't shared thus far that you would like to share with the audience?
Well, the confirmation of the cabinet will be crucial because depending on how expanded is the political, like the sensibilities of the political cabinet will be very functional to pass different laws that are sensitive. If we think there are several political parties that supported Cast that are not close to his political ideology. So depending on how large and expanded is this cabinet on political political parties will be very helpful to pass and to send a message to the country that this will be something very clear, but at the same time very with a majority that will help to execute his program. So I think that message will be very crucial in order to execute his program.
Thank you, Christian. Well, if Christian and Patricio and Christina, if you're all here at the Atlantic Council right now, rather than over video, joining us from Santiago, a room would probably erupt in applause to thank you for your great comments as part of this conversation. So in the absence of that, I will thank you for your incredible comments during this presentation. I think incredibly enlightening as we look to this consequential period in Chile, as we look to the opportunities, and as we continue to reinforce, accelerate our work here at the Atlantic Council, insofar as promoting the many opportunities that exist in Chile and with a strong US-Chile relationship. And I'm pleased again that Ms. Arst was able to join us for the duration of this event as well. So with that, thank you so much. Enjoy the warm weather in Santiago. We'll enjoy the ice and cold here in Washington, and look forward to the next time.
Very
Thank
much.